Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show tonight. Tonight we are talking about giants, and the Smithsonian. And to do that, we're going to be speaking with Hugh Newman and James Vieira, talking about their new book, Giants on Record. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. So if there's stuff going on in your life, give me a call, send me an email, and we can set up a time for a private consultation. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. Let me tell you a little bit about Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira, and we're going to get them on the air because we got a whole giant pile of stuff to talk about. Hugh Newman is an author, conference organizer, world explorer, tour host, and megalithomaniac. As well as organizing the Megalithomania conferences, he has spoken at events in the UK, Malta, France, Peru, Egypt, Bosnia, and North America. He has appeared on BBC TV, Sky Channel 200, Bosnia TV, and the History Channel in the last 4 seasons of Ancient Aliens, and recently in The Search for the Lost Giants. His webpage is hughNewman.co.uk. Jim Vieira is a stonemason, writer, researcher, and member of the New England Antiquities Research Association. He has studied the mysteries of ancient America for over 20 years and is a frequent contributor to the Shelburne Falls Independent and Ancient American magazine. And he, Jim Vieira, has presented at the prestigious TEDx conference. Yeah. As a guest on Coast to Coast with George Norrie. His research into stonework, megalithic sites, and mounds led him to the Megalithomania Conference in Connecticut, where he met Hugh and Ross Hamilton, which led Jim to the mystery of giants, where he has uncovered an account of a giant skeleton being unearthed in the neighboring town of Deerfield. So please welcome Hugh Newman and James Vieira. Hey guys, how are you?
Very good, thank you, Rita. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Rita.
I'm doing great. So Hugh, I'm going to start with you because You've been on the show several times before, and we're not going to go through that whole introductory thing. We're just going to get right to it. Why write a book on giants?
Well, no, that's a good question. That's a really good question, Rita. Thank you for asking.
And that's just like such a simple one.
Yeah, it's really just become an obsession. Really, it's a bit like the megaliths. I'm a sort of hardcore megalithomaniac, and now I've become a affiliated giantologist. So it's just a natural process, really. I mean, I was looking into all the megalithic sites, as you know, and the mound sites all around the world, including North America, and I met Ross a few years ago. I met Jim, and I sort of realized that there was something quite unusual going on in the history and prehistory of North America, linked to these mounds especially. And it kind of drew me into this world of giants, because they're always associated with these mounds, with these sites. There's lots of legends and stories, and we get them in Britain, obviously, as well. And almost everywhere I've traveled, I've come across reports, accounts, and legends associated with these giants. But in North America, there's like kind of a real reality of it. It seems like there was a huge amount of them over a very long period of time, and me and Jim just decided a couple of years ago we want to put a book together. And then the TV show happened, and now we're just kind of fully focused on it. It's become a very intriguing aspect of history to explore.
Well then, Jim, being new to the show, why don't you give the listeners a little idea of who you are, how you got involved with Hugh and studying, ancient cultures, ancient sites, etc.
I am a stonemason by trade. I studied economics at the University of Massachusetts, and I've always been interested in archaeology and anthropology, and I like a good mystery, like many people. I basically, probably about 25 years ago now, while walking in the woods around New England, I started to find strange stone constructions that didn't seem colonial. Serpents and turtles made of stone chambers, stone mounds. And I started to ask whether these were pre-colonial or not, whether Native Americans built with stone in the Northeast. And the prevailing theory is that all the stonework you see in New England is colonial, although Native Americans built with stone in other parts of the country. We know that. Actually, one of the things that's interesting is it's not just the mound sites that we find all over the eastern United States, but there was also massive stone mounds, like a 55-foot stone mound in Ohio that was taken apart to build a dam, hilltop forts, burial chambers, uncontested finds of amazing stonework all throughout the United States in ancient times. But in the Northeast, we have a situation where it's all attributed to the colonists. And so in an effort to figure out the mystery, I started to read through the old town histories and historical documents, looking for accounts of the colonists showing up and describing stonework that wasn't colonial. And I found many compelling accounts, many interesting accounts, but I also found an account of an 8-foot skeleton in Deerfield that was unearthed and reported to have double rows of teeth and a head as big as a peck basket. So I didn't know what to make of it. I just found it really fascinating. So I then read through thousands of pages of town and county histories all around Massachusetts and found similar finds. 7-foot double rows of teeth in the town history of Martha's Vineyard, 7, 8 double rows of teeth in the town history of Middleborough, on and on and on. And went to a conference, met Hugh, met Ross, and saw that a lot of other people had been finding this in the research. And then, I found more about the Native American legends, the idea that it looks like there was a royal class of Native Americans that were very tall that all the early explorers encountered. And I just, it's a strange subject, but I just think there is quite a bit of information that would indicate that it's worthy of further exploration. Quite frankly, it's the only case we're making. Although if you had us hooked up to a lie detector test, we'd probably lean on the side of there definitely being a reality to the story. There's something very strange afoot.
Well, and giants seem to be the rage today. But when you start researching online, what you find is hoax after hoax. And it sounds like you believe that giants existed on the planet. And it also sounds like you have uncovered at least some evidence, speculative evidence or reports that they did exist at one point in time.
Yeah, we've uncovered both. I mean, roughly 1,000 accounts we've amassed. My buddy Micah Ewers, he's a West Coast researcher, Ross Hamilton, Hugh and I collectively have found literally 1,000 or 1,100 accounts of 7-foot and taller skeletons in all manner of document, from 1830 to 1960, from burial mounds. In the Smithsonian Ethnology reports, there's 17 7-foot and taller skeletons listed that their own scientists uncovered. But we also found hoaxes, exaggerations, and we tackle that in our premise, and in our preface of the book. Martindale mummies, Cardiff giant. We go through some of the better-known hoaxes, but we also have found some ourselves, like the horned skull that makes it around the internet from the 1960 mound dig in Pennsylvania by Allison Skinner and Dr. Warren Moorhead. And what we found is that there are the hardened skeptics and the true believers, and we find, or I'll speak for myself, I find faults on both sides, where the true believers, got to understand, you need to do the research yourself. You have to dig without a confirmation bias and figure out if these things are true or how true they are, or if you could take it to the end, like Hugh and I did a lot in the show, where we just literally don't know what we're going to find, but we're going to try to figure out if this is accurate or not. Then the hardened skeptics will yield nothing. They'll come up with, they'll sound utterly ridiculous. Their assertions that every one of these is a hoax or a misidentification. And it's like neither of these positions make any sense. You have to dive in and do the legwork yourself, and that's what you and I have done. We thought we were going to whip out this book in 7 months, and frankly, it's taken us about 3 years of intense activity, and I'm sure he's going to have a nervous breakdown because he's been at it for like 12 hours a day for I don't know how. He kind of picked up the ball a little over the last couple of months and has really nailed everything down. And so I would say that it's an objective, open-minded look at a very controversial subject, and I would encourage your listeners to grab a copy, not because I'm just trying to push it, because I think it's the kind of book I would love to pick up. It tackles this problem from so many different angles. It's in, giant artifacts, early explorers, obscure references in town and county histories, biblical quotes. It just hits it from like this huge holistic view. Mystics we talk about, Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner, all talking about giants existing in the past and linking it to Atlantis. And it's just a wild story. I just think it deserves...
but it is a wild story. I mean, it is so outside what mainstream tries to say is true, but then they'll say, well, but Goliath was a giant, but there really weren't any giants. He was just like some thyroid guy and an enigma on society, and the rest of them, they were just really short people. And that's why they look like giants. But I'm going to come back to you, Hugh.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay.
You were talking a little bit about the mounds and the earthworks found in the United States, but don't we find similar things in your homeland? Earthworks, the dolmen, some of the megalithic structures that the mythology states are also associated with giants as well?
Oh, absolutely. There's a huge amount of giant lore in Great Britain, going back to the origins of the country. We have the history of the kings of Britain, written in the 1100s by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and that describes giants involved in the construction of Stonehenge, and even Stonehenge itself. Before it was called Stonehenge, which is a later Saxon name, was the Giant's Dance. That was its original name. And we have legends of the Trojans turning up and battling with the final remaining giants on the south coast, and then defeating them and parading them through London. That's what they do that now every November, the Gog and Magog. So we have these stories at the fundamental core of British origins, what Britain really means. So that's there, whether you like it or not. We have very old stories here, like Jack the Giant Slayer or Jack the Giant Killer, which later became a softened version, Jack and the Beanstalk, which was designed for Victorian children. But the original form of that work is quite a shocking kind of a brutal book, brutal stories. So, and then obviously you find literally hundreds, possibly thousands of accounts of legends and folklore associated with the construction of megalithic sites and earthworks. And there's way too many to mention here, but just the place names of many of these sites and towns and areas do relate to that. Even in my hometown of Cambridge, we have that, and near a village where I used to grow up, where I grew up, called Cherry Hinton. We have the Gog Magog Hills there, and legends of giants all around that area, and giant skeletons were dug up there in the 1800s. So you almost get a match all over America. You get the same kind of thing where wherever these sites are, you seem to find references, whether they're from legends or you find actual archaeological digs that have taken place and discoveries that have been reported. So you do find remarkably similar themes, and obviously the earthworks and the megaliths are strangely similar as well. Obviously, Jim's area of New England. I mean, I've been researching up there since 2007. I got blown away by all the megaliths and the chambers and the standing stones up in New England, but throughout the Midwest, the Ohio Valley and beyond, my God, there was like 100,000 of these mounds and earthworks, geometric, astronomically aligned, encoding amazing geometry and mathematics, and giant skeletons within them with double rows of teeth, who were obviously, as Jim mentioned, like the elite royal class who were ruling the whole of America at one point, or probably over a very, very long period of time, according to the dates and discoveries we've found.
And we're going to come back when we start talking about some of the skeletons that were dug up in the United States and what happened to them. You know, if you could kind of throw in what happened to those British ones too, that would be really cool, because it sounds like there's an anatomy of a cover-up across the pond as well. Anyway, moving on. You know, I brought up the concept of people saying, well, you know, the people were short and these people were taller, so they saw them as giants. Or there's the whole notion that, you know, a group of people or specific individuals within a group had some kind of a genetic abnormality. You know, they had anyway.
Pituitary.
Yeah, that one. A pituitary, and a pituitary issue going on. Were you able to separate out these notions and actually pinpoint that there was actually a race of giants, and the people that were seeing this race of giants were a traditional height, you know, somewhere between, you know, 5'4", 5'8", and up, that we would consider, you know, a regular height?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to pin down. You know, I guess, like our friend Ross Hamilton would say, that the ancient, the tall ones, were part of a bloodline that moved through thousands of years of history and were the kings and queens, the rulers of say, the Adena people, the first of the mound builders, starting about 1000 BC, 500 BC. And you find in many Adena mounds massive, well-known, you know, not archaeologists, most archaeologists would admit that Adena women were well over 6 feet, and the males would reach 7 feet and sometimes taller. And in fact, two digs in 1952 and 1958 by University trained anthropologists found 7 foot and 7'2" skeletons in Adena mounds. So that wasn't too long ago. And you have these enormous people with the royal class would elongate their skulls. They had extremely large jaws. You know, what Hugh and I try to do is to trace the story back and to give a genetic link, not just throw out a seemingly wild and controversial theory, but just say, you know, there seems to be with Heidelbergensis a find in. Well, first of all, Heidelbergensis was found in Germany in 1909, but there was a branch in South Africa, I think from like 200 to 150,000 years ago. And Lee Berger, the scientist, the anthropologist there, talks about finding Heidelbergensis bones in South Africa, and they keep on being well over 7 foot, indicating well over 7 foot tall population 150,000 years ago, roughly, and even quite frankly, it may be taller than that. And we try to in the book, weave the story together and give the reader an understanding of this is like a link to the past that may explain where the giants came from. Like 3 years ago in Denisova, a Siberian cave, the Denisovans were found. A totally new hominoid, 40,000 years old. They mated with not only Neanderthals but modern humans at that time, or Homo sapiens, and their teeth were unusually large. They had a tooth with the surface area with 50% larger than a human tooth, and one finger bone. They don't have much evidence, but it's a completely new species, and it looks like it was very robust, and it might have been unusually tall. So there can be coexisting realities. You know, you can have Lucy, you can have Darwinian evolution, but there might be something else going on at the same time, or there might be a finding scientifically that hasn't happened yet that would really pin down this idea of giants actually did exist, and here is the proof. That's a long-winded way of saying that it's difficult to nail down because, you know, as Buddy Ross would say, it's like anthropology has wanted to rewrite, you know, the science of anthropology and make us believe that nothing happened before 1930, essentially, and that all the theories were formed, and then anything before that you could throw out the window. But we've uncovered from some of the most respected physicians and historians all around the country, making specific measurements that are so well out of normal range, well over 8-9 foot sometimes, enormous skulls, even in Smithsonian ethnology reports, 28, 29-inch femur bones. The point is, these skeletons aren't getting up and running around, you know, and there's these anatomic anomalies that are strangely listed, like double rows of teeth and massive jaw bones, that would indicate that, you know, in an era of inefficient communication, these things shouldn't have been known about collectively, where everybody's reporting it buried obscurely in voluminous town and county histories. So it's this, I don't know, you just can't dismiss it away by show me the bones. It's infantile and an idiotic argument. It's like, give me your version if you think this is all some grand hoax.
Well, and they can't. And I think it's interesting that you're throwing out that 1930 date, because my opinion is that research really changed after 1930. And I love reading books from the turn of the century period because they just call a spade a spade. I mean, this one book, the Gold of Rhodesia or something like that, you know, he's talking about these different areas or the gold mines of Rhodesia and, you know, some burials they found and this and that. He goes, yeah, oh, and they found, you know, these giant skeletons and like blah, blah, blah. And he just moves on to the next thing. It's just, you know, presented in a factful way. This is what I found. I'm reporting it and we're moving on. And you can't dismiss that and just throw it away.
Yeah, the matter-of-fact nature of so many of these reports. The thing is, it's like, you know, these are mastodon bones or animal bones or misidentifications or disarticulation. They're not. They are clearly human burials we're talking about, in human burial mounds with artifacts, with jewelry, copper crowns. And the matter-of-fact nature of it, they're just like so many, they're not in the New York Times on the front page. They are like buried on page 650 amidst like a massive amount of genealogies, you know, in the town history of Deerfield and Middleborough. Just talking about the most startling things. You don't see anything like it, where these uptight historians that are totally meticulous and hell-bent on getting every detail correct all around the country are reporting something so out of normal range that's not accepted by the mainstream. You've never seen it's like the greatest historic detective novel to pick up any town history and to, you know, beyond that too, strange artifacts, brass artifacts that weren't brought by the settlers, you know, like bizarre inscriptions, curious tablets. There was a lot more going on in ancient America, you know, and I know one of the reasons both you and I got into it is basically the mound building cultures that I really didn't know much about, you know, the Adine to the Hopewell, the Mississippian people, starting at Watch and Break. 3400 BC is when the mound building cultures started in the U.S. And then there was a lapse in time. In 1500 BC, this massive site at Poverty Point, Louisiana, was built. And you have these sites like at Collinsville, Cahokia in Illinois, 100-foot high, massive earthen pyramid. There are geometric forms that are 20 and 50 acres that predict eclipses, understand the metonic cycle, massive processional ways that people would travel 50, 55 miles to get to another sacred site that predicted eclipses in Ohio. And these types of things are astounding. We never learned about them, right? I didn't learn about this in school, man. I learned that Native Americans were disorganized, savage, unsophisticated, and, and that history started in 1492.
But even when you look at the history or you try to dig up the history of America, there's not much out there. And so it's good that people like you and Hugh and Ross are, and you mentioned Wayne May, are out there kind of pounding the pavement and giving them a voice and giving them something, because there's not much. They've been so overlooked. The cultures have been so overlooked. Hugh, question. Yeah. Jim made a comment about the skeletons being buried, and I'm assuming that he's talking about them being buried in the mounds. Would that be a true statement?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, most of them are. I mean, there's a huge amount that are found actually within the mounds, often at very deep levels in the mounds as well. There's some reports even going to 60 feet below, from Indiana, for instance. And so, yeah, they're certainly in the mounds. But the thing is, the sort of history of the Native Americans, they never really interfered with these mounds. There's a lot of cultures that just let them be. They knew they were burial sites of the previous cultures there, or their very deep ancestors, and so they left them alone. It was only when the white man went over there and started digging into them, because looking for gold and treasure and things like this, that they started finding all these skeletons. But also they found graveyards whilst they're just digging cellars in houses in random places, it seems. So it's not all mounds. They found some in caves. They found some even underwater that suggest very deep antiquity, and in various other obscure places, even very close, not directly at, but very close to some dolmens in New England. We find an example down in just north of Boston. There's place called Phaeton Rock, or it's called Cannon Rock now, and just about a mile from there is a known giant skeleton discovery. And so you do find even the connections like we find in England between dolmens and giants, we do find them there. But generally, as Jim will back me up here, and Ross has been researching this thoroughly, there's a lot of them. A lot of the ones we're looking at are related to the mound or the mound culture peoples.
Well, and one of the things that I've heard that there's always been discussion about was that, and this is talking about the UK, that there was concern whether some of the sacred sites, the dolmen sites, the mound sites, were burial, areas, or if the burials were after the monument was put in place. So does this give you a little more of an idea of what was going on in humanity, and lean you more toward thinking that the burials that are found at those sites in the UK are actually tied to the sites themselves?
Yeah, I think it's the same in America as it is in England. Yes, you do find very ancient remains inside these mounds. I mean, there is also, because you have the construction inside them, you often find artifacts associated with the burial, like you do in North America as well, and in many different parts of the world. But yeah, you do find that. But you do get examples. We've seen many examples in the literature and in the historical and archaeological record of the mound culture sites, is that the later cultures would reuse the mounds as burials, and they would dig into them, and they'd be much more shallow. They wouldn't go to the deeper levels because there's a huge amount of earth and space there to bury in still, isn't it? They may have thought they were just hills, and so they would then reuse what was there. So there are examples of that, but strangely, even some of those that look like they've been reburied or used later, some of those are giants as well. And so it becomes a very confusing kind of trying to work out the timeline here, because there's a sort of fixed timeline with the Adena and the Hopewell and the Fort Ancient and Mississippian culture. It doesn't really go that far back, only 1,000 or so BC, or a bit more maybe. But there are carbon dating that does, even in the mound culture area, the very, very early Adena going into the Archaic period of like 3,000 BC, 2,500 BC, which is contemporary, obviously, with the potentially with the pyramids, with the megalithic explosion around the world. But there's also, we've found dates not necessarily related to ancient sites, but related to the giants, and certainly very tall skeletons that have been recorded. They go back 8,000 or 9,000 years in some areas, mainly in the Southwest and California area. And so we do, even though that's on the other side of the country, but so there is there is an association with burial in these sites, which I think, like in England, I think some of them were original burials and some got used later.
Well, I think it's interesting, this 3000 BC, give or take, date, because that kind of parallels, quote unquote, civilization in other areas. It's pre-Stonehenge, just pre-pyramids, kind of Sumerian. But in the Americas, they say that, the Olmec were the first people doing anything, but it predates what they say was going on with the Olmec by almost 1,500 years.
Absolutely. I mean, there are connections with the Olmec, they think, in some of the southern areas of America, around the Gulf Coast, obviously, because these are all Gulf Coast sort of dwellings around there, with Poverty Point, Watson Break, and others that then come up the Mississippi into the mound culture area. So there is a direct connection there. But I think the stuff in America could be older than the Olmec. because the Olmec goes back 1800 BC or thereabouts. There's some examples a fraction older near Guatemala City and further south in Guatemala. But yeah, I mean, the origins of these mounds and these giants are really, really under scrutiny now. I mean, we do a whole chapter, our final chapter in the book is called Origins of the Tall Ones, and we really go into all the different theories about who they could have been, where they could have come from, whether they originated in the Americas or whether they came from other places, whether they're hybrids or whatever. And so we really go into that, and we've been looking at some very, very controversial data of extreme antiquity in some areas that may be connected with these giants. So, like I say, we go into that in full detail in the book. But there is one thing you mentioned: Sumeria. This Chief Joseph. I don't know if you know about this story. Chief Joseph in 1877. He was captured by the white people who were after him, and he handed over this very unusual cuneiform tablet, which strangely it was like to do with the purchase of a land when they translated it, but it was a Sumerian small tablet dated 2042 BC, and he had it in his possession, and he said it was given to him by his ancestors many, many generations ago, and potentially even linked with an unusual foreign race who kind of gave it to him. And so we have, that's a very strange bit of information, and it was authenticated, and it had been in this family, and they proved that for a very, very long time. So perhaps we have to quite take seriously there were movements around the world. Diffusionism was a real thing, and North America was just as much a part of that as anything else. So, and we have to look at as well about the giants and the very ancient Native Americans going out and exploring the world from America and migrating out of America. This is never discussed ever, and it really baffles me, because when you start looking into it, you sort of do find little examples where you can almost see the influence from North America in other areas. And so we go into that because there could be influences going both ways that could be related to the customs and the style of the megaliths and the mound cultures all around the world now, and with the giants, about which way they migrated from and to.
Well, and could you throw out a couple of the theories that you think are really interesting? Just because.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Jim, please.
Yeah, no, I'll give my. I'm kind of an Edgar Casey guy. Really, I've studied Casey for a long time. My buddy Greg Little, his wife Laura, and John Van Auken have this great book, Edgar Casey, or the mound builders, Edgar Casey's Forgotten Legacy, where in fact, if the audience, I'm sure that most people are familiar with Casey, but he, in the early 1900s, he would go into a trance state. They called him the sleeping prophet, and he would be asked questions and would give information on health readings. He gave 14,000 readings and over 25 million words that are cataloged at the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, in Virginia Beach. And he oddly started talking about somebody's past life in Atlantis at one reading, and then more questions came, and he gave this whole grand picture, a Plato-esque version of the Atlantean Empire, how it was broken up at 3 different times, at 3 different dates, ending in a final cataclysm around 10,000 BC, much like Plato says. And Casey gave 68 readings about the mound builders, really interesting stuff that shouldn't really have been known about, and it really fascinating stuff. And he talks about like the race. He talks about somebody existing in the past in Florida and how enormous they were, proportional, bigger than the races of other people. And he talks about in Atlantis there were beings from 10 to 12 feet tall as part of the population. And I just found it really fascinating that Edgar Casey, Rudolf Steiner, Madame Blavatsky, the Theosophists, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, they all speak of giants existing as a historical fact, and that they all go back to the homeland of Atlantis, where all the esoteric knowledge from all those disciplines originated. Now, much like Native American oral history, you don't pass down information in a meticulous fashion through decades of time, through generations of time. That's erroneous. You like the Freemasons aren't going to pass along garbage information or native oral history. There is some truth in it, and you wonder why independently all these secret orders or mystics are saying the same thing. Now, in places like Portsmouth, Ohio, and other places, there was the geometric forms built in the exact replicas of the central city of Atlantis that Plato described. So you have all these mound cities that look just like the central city of Atlantis with moats, many of them destroyed now, but the archaeologists could never describe what they were, figure out what they meant. And Casey's the one that said that they were built by the descendants of the Atlanteans that came here, like the Iroquois and other native peoples. It's just this fascinating story. And now with haplogroup X, mitochondrial DNA research.
Well, let's come back to the whole DNA thing, because that's a whole conversation by itself.
Okay, fair enough. And so I just think the Atlantis angle is a fascinating one, and we talk about it in the book.
How about you, Hugh? What's your favorite theory that's tied to the giants and how they got to America?
Well, I'm of the belief, really, that actually they may have originated there, and because there's evidence of extremely ancient, modern-type human remains, so almost Cro-Magnon or Homo sapiens sapien remains that have been dated in Mexico and in America a little bit later, that do suggest very early, very sophisticated cultures were present in America, and they were the very early ancestors of the Native Americans, and I think they're all connected. And I think we have to question really this whole idea that North America, everyone came in from there. Came in from outside and entered America and then populated it, because there's a lot of evidence now to suggest otherwise, that speciation may have occurred in America itself and then spread out from there. It could have happened in multiple places at once. There's actual quite solid scientific theories that are emerging in anthropology now about that, and so we look at that as a possibility, mainly because many of the Native American traditions do state that, and they're very detailed, a lot of these, I'm sure you're probably aware of many of them, the Hopi and the very early Iroquois and other cultures do talk about the creation myths coming from the ether in that landmass. And with these extremely ancient skeletons they're finding, and artifacts that go way before the Clovis and the Folsom and things like that, huge questions are raised. There's an author called Jeffrey Goodman who was an archaeologist. He wrote a book called A American Genesis, and we cover some of that in the book, because he's even convinced that Cro-Magnon man in Europe actually came from America around 45,000 years ago, and stimulated the European cultures back then. But the thing about these Cro-Magnons is that they were rather tall. They were like 6'6". There was examples going up to 7 foot, and they weren't all white or Caucasian. They were actually kind of a slightly darker skin tone. They weren't, white as people assume Caucasians and Cro-Magnon would be. So there's a lot of debate now rising about this, and it's very intriguing. And we're on the cusp of it now. And I think the world is shifting from this idea that humans only originated in Africa, and I think that could be the key to understanding what was going on, because there's a quick, I won't go off one too much here, but if we go back just 12,000 or 13,000 years, we had the megafauna in North America, which were all over the country, giant sloths, mammoths, beavers, and saber-toothed tigers, and so on. And they kind of reduced in size and died out around 13,000 years ago. And now all this talk about the Younger Dryas impact, there's thought that quality of the atmosphere changed, and this shrunk over multiple generations and killed them off partly as well. Shrunk the megafauna, but we found a few bits of evidence that there's legends and stories saying the humans shrunk as well. So there were giant humans back then before it was in like a golden age. And one of the theories that goes with that, which is what we cover briefly in the book, is this idea of like slightly more, 0.5% more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which can trigger things in the body. It can trigger things in animals and increase body and bone mass and make you a larger person. So these aren't what you usually hear when we talk about where the giants came from. Usually it's either the Nephilim or aliens or things like this. But there's a lot of really good evidence now that a lot of the Native American myths and creation stories are being backed up by science. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg I mentioned there. We go into it, obviously, in much more detail in the book.
You do. So I have to tell you, so my late husband, Wayne, who is my co-author of E.T. Chronicles, his thought was exactly that the United States and the Americas were populated by a race of giants, and then some annihilation event happened and wiped them out. And he was talking about that almost 10 years ago, before anybody was even talking about it. But he tended to be pretty prophetic in some of the things that he said. And so I kind of don't doubt it.
No, for sure. No, I adhere to that. And there are, obviously, as you know, I would imagine there are stories that from the Native American traditions that they came from the stars. They originated from the stars. They came from outer space. So that is there as well. And it's in their tradition, and it's kind of matter of fact. But some of their traditions as well. I mean, I've been getting quite into this with Ross. Ross is like really, a lot of native elders and learnt directly from them. Vine Deloria, Jake Swamp, and others. So he's been mentoring us with this, especially this side of it. And that there's more and more evidence keeps emerging in their stories, and the more you look, and the more that gets published, and the more that's released, becomes available in the English language. It is backing up that theory now. But I think as well, and we discuss this heavily in the book, is that there were outside migrations coming into America as well, but strangely, a lot of those were fairly tall or giant people. And so there is so not only was it there originally, quite possibly, there were migrations coming in. We have the much later Nephilim, obviously. There's some evidence to back that up. We have the Salutrians coming over 15,000 or so years ago. Then we have all this haplogroup X that keeps popping up in the DNA, and then we have Melanesian and Australasian influences coming in to the southern, southwest part of America and Mexico, and we know that the South Pacific Islanders are very large people, very tall people naturally, and have been for a very long time. And if we do believe the whole land bridge theory, which is generally, it's not so convincing anymore, but if that was true, then the Denisovans may have come that way, although it's highly likely they sailed over as well. And they were thought to be very big, as Jim mentioned earlier. The robust finger bone that was described, the two very large teeth. And then, of course, that they found this very, very large jawbone, which is at least a third larger than normal, which is they think is at least 150 or so thousand years old, off the coast of Taiwan, of one of the islands off Taiwan, and so that
And it
that was
hasn't been hidden,
no, well,
destroyed, burned up,
not
put in
yet
a box
apparently.
in a safe somewhere.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. It's probably in the Smithsonian vault if you want to get into that. But yeah, so that's been discovered, and I haven't heard anything about that since it was discovered. It was only like less than a year ago, I think. So there's little bits of evidence keep popping up, but just looking into the historical record and the native myths is incredibly eye-opening.
Okay, so we talked about briefly some of the myths in the U.S., which we're going to get a little more into the reports and the mythology. And we talked a little bit about in Britain, the U.K. But are stories of giants kind of located to those areas, or are we talking about a global phenomena?
Global.
Yeah, I think it's global. Yeah, I think it's got to be global. I mean, there's Jim has been collecting reports from around the world. I've been uncovering things on my travels. I've got a buddy who used to live in Fiji, and he's got evidence there and stories from the locals and bones out there. They know where the graves of these royal giants are, but they've got spell put on the grave. So if you dig them up, you're going to get the curse of the giant hunters on you. So we don't want to mess with that. But there are stories there. There's stuff in Australia. There's giant footprints. There's Rex Gilroy's research. Everywhere you go. I mean, Jim can, we can run through some examples if you like. Italy, France, Russia, South America, Patagonia, obviously, right down on the Antarctic, going into the islands there, and so on and so forth. Everywhere you go, really.
That's pretty amazing.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead, Jim.
France, England, Spain, Italy, same thing. We were digging a foundation. We found a skeleton of enormous size, 8'4". Stone coffins, burial mounds, over and over again, just like in the United States. Oh, we could fit the jawbone over the face. Lundy Island, 8'2", 8'4". You just basically have the same thing going on both sides of the Atlantic, and then like Hugh said, everywhere else too. Japan. Australia, it's amazing, and we're just going off of we haven't gone through all these different translations and stuff like that. So there are more reports out there, but we've amassed about 500 of them, just like ones in the U.S. And then take for example in Florensis in Indonesia, when they found the hobbits in 2003. The native people had legends of the small ones, the little people, just like in the United States. And the Ibu Gogo, they call them, and they think that the hobbits of Florensis are those creatures or beings that were like 3 foot tall. So from 100,000 years up to like 13,000 years ago, these small people lived on Florensis, and the Indonesian indigenous people have oral history about the little people, and they've been written off as just more, superstitious gibberish like everything else has that's indigenous, but it's proven that there is veracity to their legends, and that's a fascinating thing about the subject. There are religious documents that talk about it. There are scientific documents, historical documents, town and history, indigenous oral history between unrelated civilizations that all speak of the same thing. Giant artifacts, like once again, mystics, all the early explorers you can name, almost to a man, identified encountering giants in their travels from Virginia to Patagonia in the U.S. and in South America. And this is a thing an anthropologist would say, or an archaeologist, like, oh, the Spanish were 5'2", and the native people were on average like 5'7" to 5'8", so they call them giant, something stupid like that. And there are specific reports by surveyors and explorers. This person was 7 foot tall, was 8 foot tall. This giant was on his knees, was much taller than any of my men, over and over again. These kinds of specific live encounters with giant people from Magellan to Coronado. So you have basically at every turn, everybody is talking about giants from a million different angles. That's why it's so compelling.
Okay. Sorry, they were bugging me in the chat room, and I'm not paying attention to the chat room, but they're bugging me going, is this show live? Is this show live? And it's like, no, I'm really trying to pay attention.
What's that mean? Is it live?
Well, versus a pre-recorded show. And
Oh, I see.
yeah. No, this show is pre-recorded live just for you. But one of the things that I find interesting, I have more knowledge of ancient sites in Britain, of the dolmen, of the stone circles. There's more pictures, more representations than I have ever seen from in the United States. Are the sites here being hidden in plain sight?
I wouldn't say that. I think there's just a level of people just that look at them and they just see lumps of earth grassed over. They don't see the intricacy. They don't see the sort of magic, the hidden, the invisible world that was associated with them. And I think that's what people tend to get excited about impressive sites. They see images of Stonehenge and the pyramids and Göbekli Tepe in Peru and Bolivia and things like this. So they don't realize that the people in America, that's actually on their back doorstep. But within just a few miles normally, within a couple of hours drive, you can probably find a mound site or a megalithic site if you know where to look. They are there. They're just not in the same kind of style and size that have become popular. So no, I think it's just a sort of a slow level of not really ignorance, just not being educated about it. There's none of it in the schooling. There's none of it in. No one talks about it. It's not really covered in the history books. Always foreign things. But if you go into the records, you do find a lot. And if you contact the local historical societies, and you get into it, you realise the magnitude of the sheer amount of man hours, the technical ability, the geometry, the metrology, the hidden earth energies, the legends, the fertility technologies that were built into these sites. You realize that it was a highly advanced culture who was doing this. And I think these Native Americans and other cultures they were working with, whether they were local or from other places, there was something very powerful going on there. And it's been a lot of talk about this, and I sort of buy this. There was like an elite, there was an elite kind of priesthood, and they interbred and they maintained these royal traits that were maintained over multiple generations right up to the 1900s. We see that with the Osage tribes, various other tribes that were witnessed even by some of the early presidents, and commented on. We've got all that in the book, a whole chapter on the presidents and giants in the book, and even Abraham Lincoln talked about the giants of the mounds, in one of his speeches when he was at Niagara. The list goes on, but I think that it's almost like, for me, this might sound a bit strange, but it's like a spell has been put over the whole thing about giants. There's been a spell put over certain information which is now coming forth at last, and this spell has been broken because these giants have been known about for a long time. It's not like we've just discovered it. It's been around for a long time, but it's suddenly everyone's realized. I think that's the thing, and it's not just they've realized they were just giants. That's not what it's all about. It's a lot of it is about being the fact that we've been lied to, or we haven't been told the truth. It's been covered up, and as it's part of our human history, then that's really not cool, and it's not, it's our right, our human right, to know our ancestral line, and for it to be messed about with and covered up. I think there's a lot of embarrassment about how the early colonizers treated the Native Americans. A lot of embarrassment, all the massacres and the killings and the smallpox and the shoving them onto reservations. There's a lot of forgiveness which needs to happen, and it is a dark side to that. And I think that's kind of the underlying problem of why people don't really want to get into it, because they have all that to get through first. And so there's a whole kind of political kind of multiple levels going on here. But obviously, one of the things we come across is the NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which is to reinter the bones, which is really nice. It's proper thing to do, of course. But that's unfortunately at the same time that's removed all the skeletons, that many of them that are on display in private museums and doctors' surgeries and historical societies and things like this, and they've all been taken away now. So there's nothing left, unfortunately, that can really be witnessed. And there's a good reason for that. The whole NAGPRA thing. There's respect to the Native American and their customs, but that has become a problem for any research trying to prove that this was really going on, because there's nothing left. And obviously you have the Smithsonian, which I'm sure we're going to get into tonight, who removed everything before the 1990 Act when it came in. So yeah, there's a whole underlying political story there of why we don't know too much, or we're not really, there isn't that high interest in the mounds and ancient sites of North America.
I would also say that racism played a big part. It's not like the ancient Britons built these things. It was another culture, a culture that was, portrayed in very unflattering ways, so the colonists basically could steal their land. Manifest destiny was afoot, and we don't have to get into everything that happened, but obviously a very miserable chapter in human history happened when from the Spanish to the English settlers, up and down, all the territories in North and South America. So you're not looking back on like the heritage of your people, quote unquote. So it gets overlooked, quite frankly, the magnitude. And I think the mound building peoples were some of the most sophisticated cultures in human history. Just amazing stuff, and stuff that, like Hugh's talking about, that you got to have a keen eye and an open mind to understand, earth energies and the conjurings of diviners and shaman and the things that happen in ancient times, fertility and stability in the landscape, and just amazing, geometry and mathematics applied to many, many structures. But, skeletons aren't a renewable resource. Essentially, these mounds were untouched for God knows how long when the colonists showed up, and there was over 100,000 earthen pyramids and mounds, and they essentially got flattened. There's some beautiful examples that still exist, like Aztalan and Moundville and Etowah, but the honest truth is they were just absolutely obliterated. The skeletons are just desecrated, thrown in for road fill, just laid out somewhere to disintegrate as people dug through the mounds for treasures. And, it wasn't a very flattering chapter in history. And we're left not knowing much other than the written reports about stationary objects that were measured and cataloged and often put on display. And when somebody says, "Oh, show me the bones," I'm like, well, from 1850 to 1940, for instance, there was tens of thousands of skeletons on Earth. Where are they? If they were all 5'8", where are they? How about the one in Eldor, Iowa, that was on display, or here? And as you see in the show, we hunted down many of these accounts, like the Rockingham, Vermont one, and it was on display. It was wired together, back to doctors' offices, and we just couldn't find a whiff of it, where it ended up eventually, like so many of them.
Well, and we'll get into that. We're getting close to break, and that's a topic. I already have a question from the chat room about what happened to all the bones. So let's, when we come back from break, tackle that also, because I think that's a really important concept. But there was another quick question from the chat room, and this was from Julie. And so they're commenting that your book just came out today, and they're, which they're like, hey, how did she get them on so quick? But she says, please ask them if they're doing a book tour and how they can get signed copies of the book.
Okay, yeah, I can cover that. Yeah, we are doing we're doing a couple of dates. On the 14th in America, on the 14th of November, we're at the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors on Saturday evening, and you can go to the COSM website, Chapel of Sacred Mirrors website. It's Alex Gray's space in New York State, and we're doing a whole evening there, book signing and lecture. On the 17th, we're going to be in Ashfield, Massachusetts, doing something in the evening, and then I'm speaking at a conference in Arkansas saw the Earthkeeper conference with James Tiburon and Graham Hancock and a whole bunch of others. That's the weekend, I think, of the 20th, the 23rd, something like that, of November. They're the only dates we've got booked because we've been really busy finishing the book. Rather than so, if anyone's out there and anyone can help us book us in to do some lectures or book signings or anything, we'd be more than happy to oblige. And if we can make it work for us and get there, it's not too far and things like this, or people can help us arrange that. We will be. Jim's coming over to England on the 2nd of November. I'm showing him around Stonehenge and a bunch of other sites. But we're launching the book in England at the Origins Conference on the 7th of November in London. And Jim and I are both speaking with Andrew Collins, Danny Hillman, Graham Hancock, and others. It's a big one-day London event, and so people can meet us there. And we're going to sign loads of extra books and have them ready to send out to people who request them. So we will have signed copies, but we're not going to be able to both be together for a few weeks. But if people just check our Facebook page, it's facebook.com Giants on Record, or our search for the Lost Giants page on Facebook. We keep everyone updated. Just like our page, and we'll keep you all updated. And obviously, people can check out megalithomania.co.uk, and I'll keep everything updated on there as well.
Okay. Well, the music, I'm sure, is rolling by now, so we need to take a quick break. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira about their new book, Giants on Record.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages. And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. We've been here talking to Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira about their new book, Giants on Record. Just Energy Radio brought to you by soulhealer.com, as well as the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. Okay, so I'm just going to toss this question out, and whoever grabs it first can answer it. In the Americas, how far back do sightings of giants go? And I'm saying sightings, not necessarily what have been found as bones.
Yeah, I can tackle that firstly, and Jim can chip in. At least to the early 1500s, without a doubt. There's sightings by Sir Francis Drake when he did his circumnavigation of the globe. He was moving around different parts of the world. This was in the later 1500s. He actually saw the Patagonian giants. Other people saw the Patagonian giants earlier, with different heights given, between 6 foot and 10 foot. There was a burial found in the Patagonia, in the southern tip of Argentina and Chile area. There's earlier sightings than that. There's one that Jim can mention from the Caribbean, but we have the Spanish explorers who are the most intriguing ones. I mean, we have a multiple reports of various explorers meeting different giants around the Florida area, going into Virginia. Then we have Captain John Smith witnessed giants. He drew them on his map famously in the late 1600s. So there are numerous accounts, but the earliest ones in North America are probably the early 1500s. That's what we've uncovered. However, there are stories and legends that go back way before that, long before that. So it depends, if she's actually talking about actual eyewitness accounts or other stories just that have been in parts of different traditions of folklore.
Well, and the question was about the actual accounts, and then we'll get a little bit into the folklore. And I think it's just, I find it shocking that there actually were eyewitness accounts of this race of giants, because I think that's one of the best held secrets to me to date. I had no idea that some of these early explorers actually witnessed. I wrote in my notes, they were seen by quote unquote real people.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh no, no. Yeah, no, this is a genuine thing. I mean, this is one thing that really blew my mind when researching this book. Was there's so many accounts, eyewitness accounts, that it's not just a handful. If you dig into the old records and you can get good translation of Spanish documents and things like this, it's surprising. Francis Drake in his diaries has numerous accounts he's got in there, but we only put a few in there because we wanted to focus on North America for this particular project. You have the White Indians of Duher from in the early 1520s. They were witnessed by various Spanish travelers. Well, they were actually trying to sort of steal Native Americans for slavery to take them back to Spain, which was a kind of big secret back then. But these were documented. They were measured. They were talked about. They were even taken back to Spain and paraded around, some of them. So you do, and there's even connections with the Duher because they were supposed to be possibly bearded as well. They had fair skin and they just looked European. It's really weird. And they were witnessed in the early 1500s. So people thought they may, not only were they very tall, but they may have come from Ireland because some of the place names were connected with Ireland. And there's lots of stories that connects them with that part of the world. So that is odd. But it's mainly the Spanish chroniclers you really want to look at, and there's been some very, very interesting accounts written out, and even fairly accurate measurements as well.
Do you want to add anything to that, Jim?
Yes, every great explorer you can think of, either their chronicler or their correspondence, talks about encountering like giants up to over 9 feet tall sometimes in parades in Mexico, and just specific, this giant was 3 foot taller than any other men, or they meet Tuscaloosa and his son, DeSoto does, and he's well over 8 foot tall. I know everybody wants to see the 11-foot giant, and I do too, but when you're talking about 7'7", 8 foot, 8.5 feet, that is just absolutely enormous and well out of normal range. And it's funny, there's all these other specific things that are mentioned in Patagonia. John Smith even said it too, like with the voice of a bull, like this incredible echoey loud voice that many of these giant people that were encountered had. And it's I don't know, I just find it fascinating. We have photographs from the turn of the century, 7'2", 7'4", the owners in Patagonia, and every week it's just, now the more you think, like every place the explorers went, they were encountering enormous people, and you could just say, oh, the Native Americans were taller than some of the tallest people in the world, but it's not that. It's like well out of normal range. And specific measurements, as you were saying, it's just like, I don't know, to get this kind of arrogant dismissal, like, we're out of our mind for taking the word. It's like, you take the words of cops because they're trained observers, just like explorers. Now, John Smith in Virginia in 1608, he made that map, the famous Virginia map. I think it's the Virginia I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. But anyways, NASA detailed it and found that it was astonishingly accurate. Just amazing, in the most difficult of circumstances that Smith was living in, starvation time in Jamestown. And we're to believe that this dude couldn't measure. He's talking about this like Susquehannocks, how huge they were, like 2/3 of a foot their calves were and stuff like that. And he has a picture of them on one of them rulers on his map. And I don't know. I just find it kind of irritating that you get this, like, oh, you just don't know any better, or you're just a dope or whatever, because we're entertaining the controversial subject. And I just find it, like I said, just excessively annoying to just get brushed aside. And Hugh and I have both done, like, so much work studying anthropological and archaeological texts for years now. And I'm well versed in how to run an archaeological dig, on standard, theories of the past. Some I agree with, many I don't. But I'm friends with archaeologists and anthropologists. But there's a lot of disdain for anybody who would bring up these controversial theories.
Hugh, you started talking about this, and I'm throwing this out to either of you, but what did these giants look like? I mean, other than being tall, and I want to get into the teeth thing in a little bit, but just general appearance. You made the comment that they had a whitish complexion or a light complexion, so that they didn't necessarily look like a Native American?
No, I wouldn't say that. Oh, you want to go, Hugh?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't really say that. But there are some. Generally, the classic Native American look is what most of these were like, really. But there are some, if you go back deep into antiquity, there was a more Cro-Magnon looking type skull, which is a more modern looking European, if you like, skull, even though it doesn't necessarily mean a white person. And so you do get that, and there's a lot of debate about that. There's a lot of researchers nowadays which we deal with who just say, oh no, all these skeletons, none of them are Native American, they're all a different culture that came in, and it's a bit annoying, actually, especially for the Native Americans. So we're just genuinely we wanted to tackle that from different angles. But you do find very strange myths in their own oral histories and traditions of. They talk about a very ancient prehistoric fairer-skinned race who seem to have appeared from somewhere and interacted with them, and then they disappeared again. So there are stories like that, but I don't think they were the only giants or anything, but they may have been different tribes of giants from different parts of the world. Who knows? This is what we sort of try and look at different possibilities of that. Clearly in the book, in the final chapter, we go into that. But no, I think we have to look at it from various different angles, which is what we have been doing, and kind of trying to tackle it. And like I think a lot of the hidden wisdom, the real nuggets of knowledge, are in the old traditions, and more that's being recognized as. This is something that Vine Deloria Jr. did. He's passed away a few years ago, but he was a brilliant Native American scholar who collated many of the stories of the ancient tribes and from the surviving elders, and he got into their confidence, and they shared all these stories. Many of them talk about giants in different ways, and talk about the megafauna. They even have very detailed timelines that go back tens of thousands of years, which describe known impact craters, certain geological changes, volcanoes and things like this, possibly the Younger Dryas and other things. And so now it's being recognized that is one of the sources that must be looked at, because that was all dismissed originally completely. And this is what we've realized as we've gone into the book. There's only a few individuals who we feature, like Henry Schoolcraft and others, who actually collected that data. So I don't know if I've kind of gone off on one and not answered the question here, but I think that is one of the key aspects.
Well, I'll throw in that oftentimes even Thomas Jefferson meeting giant 6.5 to 7 foot tall Osage warriors at the White House, stately, handsome, the most perfect human you've ever laid your eyes on. You hear this over and over from explorers and all kinds of people, quite frankly, through the last couple hundred years, when they encounter different Native peoples, the rulers of these peoples. I think Ross Hamilton would say something. We're talking about maybe a higher order, a more perfect specimen of human existed, and this was like the royal bloodline that eventually died out. With, unfortunately, most of the Native people in the United States also. But there was a royal class that was kept in place, and they had characteristics of a lot of them would elongate their skulls and would just be of a higher order and be majestic. That's another word you find. But then there's the other side of it that a lot of traditions talk about, like a malevolent race of giants. It's really strange. It almost sounds like simplistic, but you hear the same thing with the little people, like the wizards and the magicians, the little ones who were benevolent, and then the wicked ones that Lewis and Clark went to look for in South Dakota at Spirit Mound, where the native tribes were afraid to go on the hill. And just you hear the same thing. And in fact, Vine Deloria, who worked with our buddy Ross Hamilton, he was a Lakota elder. He organized a conference of Native American elders to talk about these oral traditions. And he gathered all these people to speak of the traditions of giants and little people and native tribes. Now, just like all over the world in all these different countries, you have these traditions of little people and giants. You have them in the United States, tribe after tribe, Cherokee, Sioux, Choctaw, all around the country, Iroquois. It's amazing. They all have the same legends. And then you have something like the Hobbit show up and all these anthropological mysteries. And then you have the mystics.
But what's interesting is in Celtic mythology, you have the frost giants, and then you have the light elves and the dark elves and the light dwarfs and the dark dwarfs, and the light ones are good and the dark ones are bad. And it almost kind of sounds like it's playing out in a very similar way.
It's absolutely true, and I'll let Hugh take this over in a sec. I'm sure he has something to say about it. But why burden the oral history with this nonsense if it doesn't have any, basis in reality about little people? What does it even mean? Like, I wouldn't, if I looked at a megalithic structure, I wouldn't say, oh, giants would have to have built that as a default. You might conjure it in your mind or whatever, but this idea that little people and giant people are talked about, like I said, in all these religious texts and oral traditions, isn't it so odd, that, wow, a comparative mythologist would say that little people and giants existed because all around the globe the same thing is being said. Now,
that's my theory.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, there are a couple of as one example this is one of the very earliest accounts from Alonzo Pineda when he was traveling up the Mississippi River, where he actually found not only a race of giants on the shores, but also a race of pygmies who were about 3 feet high, and the giants were about 6.5 to 7 feet high, all sharing the same land, sharing the same culture. So this was recorded and documented by the chroniclers in the early 1500s. Whether they were just completely drunk or they'd taken some magic mushrooms, who knows? But this is in the written record now, and so the fact that they were reporting that, and there's other, I'm sure Jim's got multiple other accounts as well. That this was reported, and they seem to be associated with these giants. So we find that in the historical record.
There are reports, many accounts of giants buried next to little people over and over again. And that's another thing, dozens and dozens of accounts. We can only tackle one controversy at a time, but the little people are reported over and over again. The skeletons of them found, South Dakota, in these places where there's all these legends. It's just remarkable. It's the oddest thing. And we have accounts from explorers, accounts from mystics, accounts from religious texts. And then we actually have the newspaper articles, the town and county histories, the written evidence of these things. So it's a really fascinating thing. It's all tied together, whether it's little people or giant people or bizarre and strange things. There is a written record of it. And that, I think, what's so compelling about our book. It's all stitched together in this story that's utterly fascinating.
All right, so I have this whole list of questions, and we have a half hour. That I think, I'm wait. Okay, and I'm going, okay, which one do I want to ask first? So, Jim, you had been talking about the haploid X. I'm just going to throw a few out. The haploid X DNA, but I want to talk about the double row of teeth. So this kind of whole genetic thing.
Yep.
And I guess my biggest question is, do you think they were Homo sapiens sapiens, or do you think they were like the Devonians, that they were maybe a separate species?
That's a good question. I would say that they would have to have, I think genetically it would be hidden in plain sight, where you have something like haplogroup X, which is mitochondrial DNA research really took a step forward in 1997, and they started to identify different haplogroups. I won't get into all the genetics of it, but what they found is that some people did come across the Bering Land Bridge, but others came from the idea that all Native Americans came from Asia got really the waters got muddied when they found haplogroup X, and they didn't know where it came from. They found it in Israel, they found it in the Caucasus Mountains and other places, but they didn't find it in Asia. And then eventually, a couple of years later, they found it in one small isolated place where the Altasians live. But those people did not cross, and step all across the Europe and down Alaska and past the land bridge and get to the Great Lakes region without spreading their DNA. So that's why Dennis Stanford, one of the reasons from the Smithsonian, came up with the Solutrean hypothesis, that the Solutrean culture in Europe that goes back 20,000 years and more is associated with the Clovis culture. Like, they came across the ice from Europe to the Americas. So the point is that there is a strange genetic marker, and they don't exactly know, could it have originated in a continent in the middle of the Atlantic and went in the other direction? In fact, all the places that Edgar Cayce said that the refugees of the final sinking of Atlantis went to, including the Gobi Desert, the Altasians, you find large concentrations of haplogroup X. The Iroquois people in the Northeast in the Great Lakes region had 25% of it. And Casey said that the Iroquois were like pure Atlanteans, which is just another odd kind of thing that lines up. We're trying to, basically give a reasonable explanation as to how these giant people could have existed in a genetic link and an anthropological, description of it. So it's difficult to say, but supernumerary teeth, extra teeth, seem to have something to do with giant people. I just think it needs an honest and open-minded look by more professionals, less scoffing, more paying attention, because, all throughout human history, civilizations are wrong about the theories that define, science for them. And what are we wrong about? Over and over, the Clovis Barrier isn't the only way that people came to the United States, for sure, and that's been disproven. And that was like the holy writ of archaeology for like 70 years. So many things change. And, like, when did we forget that the earth isn't flat, and to not, scoff at people who have different ideas, And
so what about the double row of teeth thing? And there is a question from the chat room about the giant teeth they found in Russia, which I don't know. What about the double row of teeth thing? That just seems and actually, and I'm going to toss that to Hugh because I have a question, and I know that this might be more you, because don't some of the elongated skulls in South America also have double row of teeth?
No, not that I'm aware of. No.
Oh,
I haven't seen any. Brian's not reported on any, Brian Forrester. So, no, not that I'm aware of. And I've been looking carefully, because there you have lots of skulls to look at. Not that I'm aware of, but in North America, for some reason, that's where you kind of get a majority of them. With the giants, usually, there's a few. It's one of those. It's one of those things that happens. People get double rows of teeth. They get supernumerary teeth. There are known genetic causes, and it does happen. And there are photos online. It's been in the newspapers. It happens now. So it could have easily been happening in the past as well. It's a genetic throwback from possibly earlier cultures. It's known that some early Neanderthals may have had trontidism, where they get just like too many teeth in the mouth. You have the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence Great Lakes cultures going back 5,000 BC. They were reported by archaeologists and anthropologists, the skeletons they were discovering, to have double rows of teeth. And also we've got maybe 40 or 50 accounts in America relating to the giants. Jim's got some in his local area in New England, and in California at Lompoc and other places. And so we spoke to Dr. Shara Bailey, who's a New York University dental anthropologist. She was part of the TV show, but we interviewed her, and I chatted with her further to get some data for the book. And she was blown away by all the accounts, because some of them are clearly stating 2 rows of teeth on the upper jaw and things like this. So it's not just the parlance of the time. It's not just what some people claim. It's just the way they used to say things. They're clearly stating they had extra teeth in their mouth. That the amount of teeth, sometimes there's increased numbers of teeth compared to normal. Sometimes there's just extra supernumerary single teeth on both sides of the jaw. Sometimes there's complete double rows, multiple examples. And also one example from Florida, recorded by a Smithsonian scientist, back in the very early days of this research, in the early 1800s, I think, where they had 3 rows of teeth. The 3rd row was coming through. And so we do find very strange examples. But where it comes from is unknown. But Shara Bailey thinks it could be like a genetic throwback, which is triggered because of, once the jaw, which we know was very large, from all the accounts we've been looking at, this huge jaw that could fit over the face of anyone who finds it, the largest man in the village, etc. That would give the space and the trigger for it to possibly another set to come through. And so there could be genetic triggers when you get to a certain size, if you're from that particular lineage, where you may get genetic throwbacks over multiple, even hundreds, tens or hundreds of generations. So there's a few bits of data which do back it up, and there are very early historical accounts, in the old Babylonian Talmud and other old texts that do talk about it in different countries as well. So, and they're related to the giants.
Any connection to the elongated head phenomena and cranial deformation with these accounts of the giants?
Yeah, we've got a segment in the book at the back end of the anatomic anomalies chapter about cranial deformation in North America specifically. And yeah, there is multiple traits, mainly towards the northwest areas, but there are examples in scattered around different parts of the country, which is a very unusual thing to be doing to your child's head. So why they would be doing that, we don't know, but clearly they did it in South America as well. There's a huge amount of being discovered down there, thanks to Brian Forrester and various other good researchers down there. Some of those, though, as Brian, as you know, you've had him on your show, is they do appear to be natural, which is very odd. And so what the hell is going on there? That's like a whole other branch of humanity where it's really not explained fully, and that needs more serious research rather than scoffing at by academics. And there's one area, though, which Jim has done more research on than me, and he's been down near there, is the Sonora Desert in Mexico, which stretches up into North America as well. But down there's an area where back in the early 1900s, multiple mummies were found which were of giant stature. In one area, and it's called the Lost City of Giants. Paxton C. Hayes was the researcher, the archaeologist down there, anthropologist with the Smithsonian he worked for. But in that same area in 2012, within 20 miles of the Lost City of Giants, in that particular area, they found a whole grave site of very elongated skull people, extreme cone heads, which were a completely different era, probably, maybe not, but it's the only place where there's strong evidence of giants and the elongated skull people in the same place. So whether they colluded, whether there was a bit of mating and weird hybridization going on there, we don't know. But
the Adena elite in the northeast of the United States and the eastern part, the elite elongated their skulls too. And they were all the giant ones found in in the mounds. So there is that connection also.
You get that thing as well. I mean, there's some weird ones, aren't there, Jim, where they kind of they flatten the back of the skull, so you get a wider kind of look from the front, but you get a thinner from the side, which is quite a weird thing to do in itself. Why you would do that? Maybe to sort of try and make them increase their height or something. And then you get other ones like go through the top middle of the skull, which it's like a cleft and it pops out on the sides. But that's not there's more anatomic anomalies. I mean, Jim loves this, the horn skulls. That's his favorite subject. But basically,
No,
I've seen those pictures.
They're fake. But we debunk one in the book.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we don't want to give too much away on air, but yeah, I mean there are some accounts, not many, just a handful, like 5 or 6, of horn skulls being discovered. 2 or 3 of them are of giant stature, but the famous one is the Sayre, Pennsylvania one, which we investigated pretty thoroughly because we thought that skull, everyone's seen that picture of this amazing horn skull. It's got this kind of stuff around it, these thorns around it. Everyone thought that was from actually discovered there, but unfortunately we don't think it is now. We found out where it comes from. It's actually in Europe. The photo became attached to the story, but we go into the story because it's a very intriguing story about how things can be blown out of proportion, even in the 1800s, when it was discovered, I think, or the early 1900s, and even the newspapers then would exaggerate. They would create stories. So we've been quite careful with as many accounts as we can. We've investigated to their source. Some you can't. Some come to an immediate dead end. You can't go anywhere with them. So we thought we'd include them anyway because everyone loves to hear about a 14-foot skeleton. But the horn thing is a weird one because you get that naturally as well. That does happen. People do have horn skulls. Even Moses was associated with having a horn skull back in some of the ancient texts in the Middle East. So that's another thing that has become associated with the giants. It's more of a kind of we're not too sure about it, but we included it anyway. I persuaded Jim to let me include it in the book, and he eventually gave in.
What about technology? When I look at mythology, the giants in some cultures, like the Greeks, for instance, the giants are always associated with technology, building the weapons of the gods, or in Celtic mythology with building the weapons. They're always tied to building weapons. Did you find any stories, or did you find any evidence that would maybe support an advanced culture and advanced technology among this group of giants?
I would say in the United States there are myths and legends about malevolent giants that are more of a lower level of technology. They're more, set a trap for you kind of creatures that like eat the children of the village. Then the wizards and the shamans are associated with the supernatural, whether it's Catalina Island or all, in Ohio, that the tall people are usually associated with the supernatural realm. And not in, I'm just speaking for the United States, I mean, in America. The myths, the legends, the reports, it just seems to be, like we always like to say, like a royal class that, rather than possessing technology that didn't seem to line up with, like, you look at the Great Pyramid, you look at different structures around the world, and you're like, I don't think somebody in 2750 BC could build the Great Pyramid with copper chisels, with the tools of the time, and they often talk about the Egyptian oral tradition would talk about the ancient ones and this technology they had, and it doesn't seem to occur, as far as I'm concerned, of what I found in the United States. It's more of a mystical, supernatural association with the tall ones that went back maybe 6, 7, 10,000 years ago. And I have not found in the United States that kind of association.
We do find... but we do find examples of, technology in a different way. We do find very sophisticated pipes and the whole Squire and Davis collection.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And some of the stuff, people may not see this as technology, but the stone tool technology was highly advanced at a very early time in America. And we found giant artifacts of axes and weapons and blades and things like this, which are very, very ancient and way too big for any normal sized human to actually wield and smash things up with and chop wood with and things like that. And so there are examples there in the historical record that some are on display at museums. There's beautiful metallic objects and mica, obsidian, and things like this. And they had an understanding of metallurgy, especially the further north you go into the whole Great Lakes area, Wisconsin, Michigan area. And so, yes, there are certain things like that, and that there is more and more evidence emerging of seafaring capabilities, especially on the West Coast. We've been looking into the California Channel Islands, going over into the Pacific. We find examples in Baja California, up to Canada as well, which looks like there were the worst seafaring cultures associated with North America, hence all the migrations in and out of the country in prehistory. So there are different levels. But I think when you're looking at the mounds, just as an example, the technology to build those, I mean, the intricate geometries, the layout, the alignments between one site and another, the astronomy, that is an extremely high level of technology. We don't even have we don't have that in us today. We rely on all this modern computerized electrical technology and things like that. But they had it. They did it in a different way. They utilized the earth to do it, i.e. the earthworks, the earth energies, and what was available to them naturally. They would observe from different positions within these huge geometric aligned earthworks. They would have water channels and canals and things like this, working with them. And there's even myths and legends of thunderbirds who turned themselves into giants, and they would build the canals for the normal average sized people as a gift to them from the gods, kind of thing. And they would return in form to thunderbirds and disappear again. So we do find, incredible examples of that, of this sort of, it's like a lost technology, but it's like an invisible technology which can still be observed and recorded today with all the fertility, the earth energies, the altered states of consciousness that these sites can trigger.
And it's something that people like yourself, or a name that comes to mind, Maria Wheatley, are really starting to investigate, that no one's looked at or investigated really at all.
I agree. I mean, I think it's one of my pet subjects. Actually, I'm really interested in utilizing the natural energies of the earth, because it's such a power source. It's the ultimate power source, apart from the sun, of course. And so, it's just about utilizing that for multiple different purposes. And I think the way the ancients did it, and I think there's a lot of science to back this up. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of tests being done with magnetometers and electric voltometers and things like this by the brilliant late John Burke and Kaj Halberg and Philip Callahan and others before him. And they recognized there was something going on there, and you can actually find examples in the record about that, about what they were doing and how they developed agriculture and guaranteed crop success. And Jim uncovered a couple of accounts, actually where they found a corn seed in a jar in the hand in the grave of a giant, buried beneath 60 feet beneath a mound in Indiana, which is probably thousands of years old. And they took the seed out and it looked fine, so they planted it, and the yield was higher than average for that type of corn. And so they had an understanding of agricultural and farming technology, and I think they manipulated the natural energies of the earth. And with thunder and lightning, we have all the Thunderbird mythos with it as well, and they had a very deep understanding of that, and they were like high-level magicians, wizards, whatever you want to call it, shaman. Sorcery is probably a bit of a strong word, but they had these powers, and they utilized it.
So here's the $1 million question, or maybe the $5 question. But with all of these reports of them still being alive when the explorers came around, what happened to them?
Yeah,
the giants.
I'll take that. One of the thoughts is that the last of the giants were to be found, say, from Patagonia into the United States, that there was interbreeding, and that's where sometimes it's mentioned that through the act of interbreeding, you have like anatomic anomalies might present themselves, like double rows of teeth, as a function of inbreeding. Just a theory, but basically 90% of native populations were decimated in just a couple generations. And it was kind of the last bastion of the giants. You have this, all the accounts and the legends in the Holy Lands in England and other places. But I think I think the United States was somewhat isolated. I think there was, acts of diffusion, people that came here, but I don't think it was like a conveyor belt back and forth. I may be wrong, but I just think the United States was kind of an isolated place, and the Americas were, in that you had, basically that these giant people just died out, and I don't know if the atmosphere was different at some point, like you talked about, with megafauna, megaflora, and then you had kind of an interbreeding or a royal class that of this kind of magnificent strain of human that once existed. But I just think that there is so much corroborative proof, corroborative evidence that is pointing to so many people encountering this, so many reports. And when people ask where are the skeletons, I would say between 1850 and 1940, for instance.
And that would be my next question.
Yeah, thousands of reports. And, like we talked about it, they would just go in and decimate, all these graves. They used skeletons as road fill in Deerfield, where the first giant skeleton account I found. They'd go through in Martha's Vineyard. Everybody would take their skeletons, all the farmers and stuff, into one pile in Edgartown, and they just disintegrate. Some of the more ancient tombs, even the Smithsonian ethnology reports, would disintegrate to dust. It would say it because they were these ancient burial places were so old that the bones would crumble to dust. You have a non-renewable resource, basically remains that weren't respected. And if you say, where are all these skeletons, or they're all exaggerations or hoaxes, then show me all these 5'8" skeletons they were purported to be. Where are they? They just don't exist anymore. Some went to museums. It's a frustrating topic, because there's no question that you have throngs of people visiting, this giant skeleton on display in the middle of the town, and the 1860s or whatever. You get the doctor talking about it. As you read the book and you read the accounts, you will see there is so much veracity to these reports, and they go out of their way to say, and this is a man who would never exaggerate, or the largest man in the town fit the jawbone over his face. From Massachusetts to California, they say the same things. It's not as easy as, the Smithsonian scooped up all the bones. It's more of, I think giant skeletons were linked with the lost race theory, because when colonists showed up, the native peoples were being decimated by the diseases already from the Spanish explorers down south. They were disorganized. They were not at that glorious height that they once were, the cultures that built all these mounds and stuff. So basically, the colonists said the Native Americans couldn't have built all these mounds, but we now know that Native American ancestors were the constructors of all the earthworks in the U.S. But with that lost race theory, there was another race of white people who showed up to do this, was the findings of giant skeletons and those thoughts of some Atlantean race or some lost race, which there might be some truth in it, but the point is that giants got thrown in with the racist idea of the lost race, even though they occur over and over again in Smithsonian ethnology reports and other scientific documents of the time. So I believe it's like an academic bias, and it just got solidified by racist zealots who guided the Smithsonian, like Dr. Hrdlicka from 1910 to 1940, and you have a culture of scientists that just view this as totally, foolishness, and fairies and demons and unicorns, and you're out of your mind to even approach it. So they ignore all the native traditions, all the accounts, and basically just laugh at you when you bring this up, and it's really not too cool.
Okay, so both of you have talked about this large number of bones and skeletons that have been unearthed in our relatively recent past, but not lately. Why haven't there been anything uncovered or reported lately? I mean, people are still digging in their backyards. People are still doing people stuff.
That's a good point. Yeah, I see very few skeletons reported, like burial site. It's illegal to dig in burial sites now. Once in a while you'll have. I think in Arizona there was recently some hikers found some human remains that were ancient. It was like a free for all of unearthing of remains, and that's a good question. And that's one a skeptic would point to, and I would say, well, that the level of investigation and digging and has really petered out, but people are still building foundations and things like that, and you would think you would find reports of skeletal remains that were unusually large. I got to say that it's like I think we all feel that there's something behind the extraterrestrial visitations, right? People just know something's going on. They see things. What is Bigfoot all about? It seems like there's a reality that escapes our grasp. Like Hugh says, like there's a spell on this whole subject. No matter how much proof you have in so many different forms, where's the 10-foot skeleton? I'm sure some Illuminati freak has like a couple of skeletons in his basement, but why isn't an archaeologist digging up a 10-foot skeleton at a mound site in Illinois or something like that? In the last couple of years, or an 8.5-footer or something. It's a very good question, and one hopefully that'll get answered in the next couple of decades. Maybe as humanity's consciousness opens up and a critical mass is met, as people start to really question all these theories that are clearly wrong, then there'll be like an opening of knowledge of some sort. But I can't give you a definitive answer for that question.
Any comment on that from you, Hugh?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jim, and I think one of the issues is the NAGPRA thing. So if people do find anything, then it has to be reported and it has to be taken away, and it probably happens fairly quietly if that process does happen. I don't think it's going to become public knowledge, or any archaeologists or reporters are going to get involved. And also I think there's a lot of bones and a lot of artifacts in private collections. I think Native Americans have probably got some in their sacred historical areas, and they keep them like that, and they protect them. So I think it's become, just the nature. I mean, the European or American modern North American nature is that we want to inspect everything, bones, this, that, and the other. Where the whole Native American thing isn't like that. It's a very sacred thing. You have to bury it properly with ceremony and things like this. So I can understand why they're not going to just present them and give us a break with our book. There's more at stake than a book about giants. But I think I think we have people contacting us after the TV show came out, and maybe we were with the book, who were saying, "Oh well, I know where there's a 9-foot skeleton. I know where there's bones and a skull and some artifacts." So we're having follow-ups here, but we're treading very carefully. It'd be great to just see some photos or some evidence and of things that are still kept, because who knows where they are. I mean, I think that, obviously having the smoking gun would be useful, but I don't think it's all about that. I think it's about uncovering the truth. I mean, the real question is, why have they all gone missing before NAGPRA, before that 1990? Where did they all go? What did the Smithsonian do with them? They're who we should be asking where the bones are to, because they're the ones who collected them. When just in their own ones, they collected themselves in their own excavations. There should be hundreds, if not thousands, of examples to look at, aside from all the ones that were sent to them or collected by the Smithsonian as they travel around the country all through the 18 and early 1900s. There's so many accounts we have. We have a whole chapter called the Smithsonian Files that covers all that, because that's where the disappearance of them happened. And unfortunately, we even have we've seen a session demolition cards where they've received the skulls, the bones, and things like this. And you go to the Smithsonian, you ask them questions, boom, nothing. They don't even know anything about it, even though it should be in their records. And so that's the real kind of problem. That's the giant problem we're dealing with.
It is a good, but over and over again, the measurements, not only here, but in Europe, in England, in France, 28, 30, 32, 34-inch skulls, 28, 29, 30-inch femur, over and over again. Those are 8, 9, even 10-foot tall humans, over and over again. And you could say, where are the bones? And believe me, nobody wants to see them more than Hugh and I, but independently respected people, oftentimes anthropologists at the time, are documenting these outrageous size finds over and over again. And it's like every one of them, they're like, making up a hoax for no perceived gain or misrepresenting the truth. All these people who have otherwise spotless careers, or the mayor of the town is there with the town doctor. It just doesn't make sense. And that's why I would advocate getting a book. And in fact, we've dug into many of these accounts, but if there's so many that are in probably anybody's general area, whether it's California or Vermont or whatever state. And as we did in the show, we have handwritten notes, we have eyewitness testimony, doctors who have these things wired together in their offices. We want more evidence, but to dismiss it all with that one sentence just doesn't do the whole thing justice. And that's why a good read of the book is definitely, I think people will be utterly fascinated and will have no doubt that this whole thing requires further investigation.
Well, and I think in your book, Giants on Record, had to look it up, provides a lot of written evidence. I mean, okay, we don't have the bones, which it would be really nice to have a bone so we could do some DNA testing. I mean, there's multiple levels of why it would be really nice to have one jawbone with double teeth. That would be awesome.
Could I interject for just a quick second?
Okay, we got 2 minutes.
Okay, like the Smithsonian, they have 17 accounts of 7 foot and taller. They have jawbones that fit over the face in their records. They have double rows of teeth in their records. So it's as simple as the Smithsonian doesn't claim to have any of those. So it's the same thing. Not that they didn't crumble the dust or blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like that's what we're dealing with. It's not just we're crazy, Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm a little crazy.
Yeah, maybe. You're on my show. I mean, come on. But even, the amount of written documentation, newspaper records, from everywhere. I mean, why would my thought is, why would multiple people from multiple parts of the world all be saying the same thing and providing similar reports if there wasn't a nugget of truth that rang through all of them?
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I mean, there has to be. I mean, we wouldn't research it just for a laugh, just to kind of try and prove to the world we believe in giants. It's not what it's about. It's just one of those fascinating kind of subjects, passions that's just sort of grabbed our attention, and we're just running with it and seeing where it takes us. And even if we don't find any bones, as maybe we just need to break into the Smithsonian vaults and then we can have some. But that might take a crack team of SWAT military people. But anyway, I'm just saying that
the Smithsonian and the Vatican, they're kind of neck and neck. Who's got the better stuff?
Yeah, who knows, eh? I mean, yeah, if I could have an invisible cloak and pop down to them and have a look around, get some photos on my iPhone,
Well, they got the magic ring at the Vatican that makes you invisible, I'm sure.
Yeah, that would be handy.
I do like the new Pope, though. Maybe he'll release some stuff.
Who?
The new Pope.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I dig him.
Anyway, the music, I'm sure, is starting to roll, so I'm going to have to say goodnight, but I still have a whole page of questions that I didn't even touch. So we'll have to have you guys come back on, okay?
Absolutely.
Groovy.
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show and sharing this great interview.
No problem.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot, Rita.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks for having us.
All right, thanks.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye. That's Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira. Their book is Giants on Record. Hugh's website is hughnewman.co.uk. You can also find them on Facebook /Giants on Record. And then next week, we're going to be speaking with Arthur Farm about the secret history of America. And in the second hour with Ken Cherry,